You might have a fabulous leader who is at the top of their industry, running their organisation or would like to. They know every customer and client and they are just technically brilliant. And we all know people like that, but they don't bring their heart to work. They seem to leave it at home. They might be full of humility and empathy and self-awareness with their families or in their communities, but they're really, unable to see how that can be integrated to the leader they are at work.
Hi, my dear listeners. Happy New Year. This is your channel for creating ripples of inspiration, inspire someone today. Couldn't have been chaffed with the guest that we have today. New year, new start, and the release of a new book. With me today is an award-winning and globally recognized leader, executive coach, company director, writer, and speaker, Kirstin Ferguson. She is smiling her way after completing her next book or her second book, which is Head and Heart. It's our absolute honor to have Kirstin on Inspire Someone today. Kirstin, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Shrikant. I'm just thrilled to be here with you.
So, Kirstin, what a journey that you had, starting your career as part of the Australian military, now to be an acclaimed author of 2 books, being in the top 30 list. I think I would want to start off with, you have played many roles, but with one purpose. What's that purpose that's driving Kirstin?
That changes on any given day, Sri, but you're right, I do a lot of different things. I, as you said in the intro, sit on company boards, which is very different to writing books, which is completely different to being an executive coach. And of course, I'm also a mother of 2 daughters, wife, a daughter myself, I volunteer. So I think if I was to put all of that in a pot and mix it all together, my purpose is actually probably pretty simple, and that's just to leave a positive legacy in my wake. And I think we all have the opportunity to do that every day, and it doesn't matter what we do. You don't need to be an award-winning anything to leave a positive legacy, and that's how I like to think about everything that I do.
That's a wonderful start, leaving a positive legacy. And boy, you did have that kind of a legacy built right from your career start with the Australian military. So how did that experience shape up to the person that you are today, Kirstin?
Yeah, and I think an unexpected beginning for someone like me. I was 17. I had been at an all-girls private school, and I found myself at the Australian Defence Force Academy, very much outnumbered by men. And this was back in the early 90s, and it was a pretty tough environment and culture for women then. Yet, I was really fortunate. I did extremely well, and I ended up coming top of my Air Force graduating class. And so I think what I learned through all of that was just the power of hard work and resilience, but also working as a team, needing to earn respect from those you lead. I mean, when you're young, sort of 17, 18, 19, and you become a young officer, you're leading people who have been in the military longer than you've probably been alive. So that teaches you a lot about earning respect of those followers you might have. I learned how to remain calm in a crisis, which has served me well many times since. And I think, as a leader myself, I did learn how to succeed in a very male-dominated environment, and that went on to have a big impact on my career, and I think also my ability to adapt to different leadership styles and different contexts and cultures, because once I finished my time in the military, every culture I worked in and led in was completely different. So I had quite a bag of tools I needed to be able to draw on.
You did have that bag of tools, and you flipped yourself to do completely different. You were on boards, you were appointed to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. How did that experience bring about the leadership lessons that you had learned elsewhere?
Yes, well, there was a lot that happened before I joined boards, I must say. So after I left the military, I went into law and qualified as a lawyer, but was working in a large corporate law firm leading others, and I kept doing that. I really love, I've always loved, I think, leading other people and being part of that team and helping them go in whatever direction, we need to go. And after working in the law firm, I went on to become CEO of a group of psychologists. And so all, again, completely different culture. You've gone from the military to a law firm to a group of psychologists. And I think that's where my ability to adapt to different cultures has really helped. And it was while I was CEO of this consulting firm that I joined my first board. And I was really relatively quite young. So I was appointed to my first board when I was 35. And the average age of company directors, certainly in Australia, is 62. And I joined then my first publicly listed company board at 38. And I'm now 49. So I'm still well younger than the average and have already had more than a decade sitting on company boards. So my career has always been an unusual one. And, now I'm writing books and doing less boards. So I think the board experience, though, has been phenomenal for my ability to learn to lead with influence. Because when you're sitting on a company board, you're not running the company in most situations. And I've always been an independent company director, so I'm certainly not the CEO or owner. And so that's when you really need to understand how to ask great questions. And it's all about influence and helping other people who are running the company understand, the direction you might think we might need to head in. But it's also being part of a team, and a very different kind of team than you might be used to working in a company where you're seeing them every day and it's sort of all hands on deck. When you're on a board, you come together much less frequently, but you might disagree on different ways of doing things, but ultimately you all need to be coming together in the interests of the organisation. And I think that's both those different aspects, asking great questions and navigating differences of opinion, but always going in the same direction, have been really valuable leadership lessons.
Wonderful. You have been playing the leadership role across various forums, right? Like you mentioned, from the military to the psychologist society to directors to being an author. How easy or difficult to bring in those leadership elements in each of these various facets? Is it the same? Is it different? How have you kind of changed yourself or your styles to adapt to these varied circumstances?
Well, I think it sort of has culminated in what I've tried to write about, because in each circumstance, I'm the same person, I'm the same leader, Kirstin, using my head and my heart in different ways, though. So the way I could influence an outcome with lawyers is very different to how I needed to influence psychologists. Lawyers are driven by their head and by, in many cases, financial outcomes and the idea of justice and making sure that every box is ticked. And so if I wanted to influence an outcome, I really needed to understand how to use my head in a way that would help do that, but never forgetting, my heart. And then with psychologists, they are a lot of heart. We were a for-profit company, but what motivated the people I was leading was not the amount of money the company might make, but the amount of difference they could make in the lives of others. And so it was a complete reverse, but the outcome in both situations might need to be the same. It's just, as a leader, you really need to be able to read the room and understand what's going to be most effective in that situation. And then that's been amplified now sitting on a range of different boards. And every board I've ever sat on has been completely different. And the cultures of the companies that I've been governing have been completely different. And so adapting your leadership style is a really necessary skill for every single person out there listening.
So that's the bottom line, adapting your leadership style no matter what the circumstance is. And Kirstin, while I was researching on you as to, okay, what are you up to? What are you doing? Of the many things that I read about you, which we have been talking about, one thing that really stood out, every piece of article that I was looking at that was mentioning about you, the reference was the viral campaign that you ran, #celebratingwomen. Tell me and my listeners a bit about it and what has been your learning coming out of this.
So that was the most unexpected aspect of my career to date, I think. And what it was, yes, it was a viral social media campaign, but I never intended to create that. And at the very start of 2017, I remember just feeling really annoyed at the level of abuse women were facing online. And I love using social media, so to any listeners, you'll find me on all the main platforms. But you can't help but notice that women get a pretty hard time just for having an opinion online. And so on one particular day, I'd seen a thread of tweet, and I remember thinking, if I'd been standing next to the woman when this was said by someone, you would respond, you would say something, you'd call the police perhaps. But online, it's very difficult to do anything at all. And so I decided to come up with, literally that afternoon, with no planning, no thought, no nothing, I asked my mother 4 questions and asked her to send me some photos. And I shared her answers online and the photos, and I didn't tell anyone it was my mother, but I noticed people were just interested in her story. And she's no one special, she's a retired nurse and she's done some interesting things in her life, but no one we would normally hear about. And I've always believed that every woman is a role model, and I just wanted to see if I could make our news feeds online just that little bit more positive. So I made a very bold public pronouncement. I don't know where I got this confidence from, I can assure you. But I said I was going to celebrate 2 women every single day of 2017, and from anywhere in the world in all walks of life. And I ended up celebrating 757 women from 37 countries around the world. And it led to a book I've written called Womankind. And it's led to spin-off campaigns around the world and different industries and different organisations. And the bottom line was that view I had that every woman is a role model remained true. So every one of the 757 women, and I celebrated anyone who identified as a woman. So I certainly celebrated trans women as well. All they had to do is identify as a woman, and I would celebrate them. There was no prerequisite. You didn't have to have achieved what we traditionally sort of think of as an achievement. And in fact, I wouldn't let people talk about what job title they might have, because I was just interested in them as a person and as a woman. And so I celebrated cleaners, people cleaning hotels, retirees, a teacher in Kabul, a pet whisperer from California, perhaps not surprising. I'd never heard of a pet whisperer. Truck drivers. There were also quite well-known people, deputy prime ministers and ministers, but they were never celebrated for their jobs. They were only ever introduced by their first name. And it was easily the most rewarding year of my life. But I think it's also a lesson for not planning ahead. Had I understood how big it might get, I think I would have spent far too long, being strategic about it and planning and how was I going to do this. But I just jumped in, and it was a wonderful experience.
What a wonderful story there it is, Kirstin. In lot many ways, this is what this platform is all about. We call it as creating ripples of inspiration. And what you have done through that act is exactly that. Acted on that thought, on idea, and created a ripple of inspiration that had impact worldwide.
And it's so rewarding for me now that I hear from some of those 757 women who, for me, it's felt like such a small thing for them to do, to say, oh, sure, I'll give you some answers and photos. But of course, it isn't a small thing for many women who often said to me, oh, I've got nothing to celebrate. They didn't feel they'd done anything. And I, of course, insisted and said, I'm going to celebrate you anyway. And the impact of seeing themselves recognised by other people, by strangers who, thought they were fabulous, whatever it is they might be doing. Those women have been in touch since, and so many of them have used it as this ability to then launch into doing something else themselves. And the number of spin-off campaigns, people would come to me and ask permission, in inverted commas, could they use the hashtag celebrating women in wherever. And I've never felt ownership of that. I want others to do as much with it as they can, to take it bigger and further and more creatively than I could do. And that is exactly what you're talking about, Shri, those ripples of change.
Wonderful. I'm sure you have given my listeners few ideas to think about and act upon that. And the heart of our conversation here, yes, I say heart of our conversation is to talk about head and heart. This is your brand new book that is getting launched. This is all about leadership lessons. In a world that is filled with so many leadership books, why another leadership book? And tell us about head and heart.
Oh, Sri, I couldn't agree more. And the fact there's so many leadership books out there was something I'm really conscious of. So for anyone who does pick up mine, I'm very humbled. It's a crowded market, that's for sure. But what I have observed throughout my own career and working with other leaders is that you might have a fabulous leader who is at the top of their industry, running their organisation, or would like to. They know every customer and client, and they are just technically brilliant. And we all know people like that, but they don't bring their heart to work. They seem to leave it at home. They might be full of humility and empathy and self-awareness with their families or in their communities, but they're really, unable to see how that can be integrated to the leader they are at work. And likewise, I know many leaders who lead with their hearts, and I mentioned, psychologists before, which is a beautiful quality, but you can't just stay in that space. We have to be able to understand through our heads how we can be ensuring that whatever it is we're doing is capable and wise as well. And so I wanted to measure, well, what does it mean? Because the term head and heart, we all know what it means. Who hasn't said, my head says no and my heart says yes, or someone might tell you you've got rocks in your head. Like, we all understand what generally that metaphor means. I wanted to measure it. Well, what does it look like in a leader? Because intuitively I know that the modern leaders argue we need in the world around us now are able to integrate their head and their heart in any situation, and they know what's needed when. And it's called Head and Heart, the art of modern leadership. And for me, that art is really understanding that in any given situation, you're going to need a different amount of these attributes of the head and the heart. And the art is knowing what is needed when.
And I did have the opportunity to kind of glance through some of the stuff of Head and Heart. I'll let the listeners to pick up the book and read, so I'll not touch upon the Simon Sinek inspiration or the Kabul story. But what I would love to hear from you is a story that resonated very well as I was reading through your post book, which was the incident that you described about the cash register at a shopping mall. Tell us a bit about it, and what leadership lesson did you draw out of that?
There was a young woman working in a supermarket during the pandemic, and everyone probably remembers going to the supermarket in the height of the pandemic was not a fun experience. There was always people panic buying or feeling stressed and wearing their masks, and it was just a difficult environment. And I remember standing in the queue waiting to, buy my groceries, and there was a young girl working on the cash register, and she would have only been 18, 19. And there was a man in front of me, another customer, who you could just tell he was angry and annoyed, and lots of people were at that time, but he was starting to just get irritated. And I'm a mother of daughters of the similar age, and so I could feel myself ready to sort of stand in and look after this young woman, but I was to discover she didn't need looking after at all. Anyway, he eventually complained about having to wear a mask, and, he was aggressive to her about the fact he wasn't going to shop there again. And just as I and others were ready to step in, she very calmly and graciously, explained to him that she didn't like wearing a mask either. And I think she made the point, she's in there for an 8-hour shift. He's only in there for about half an hour. But that she was doing so to keep him safe, but also her grandmother, who she was living with. And it was the smallest of moments. And I genuinely believe that leadership is all about moments. Every moment is a moment to leave a positive legacy if we link that back. And in this moment, she did. He calmed down. She influenced all of us. I now have written about it in a book. It's these ripples that in any given moment, anyone can be a leader. And this young girl had no formal authority. She would have been the most junior person working in the supermarket probably that day. Yet she demonstrated as much leadership as we would hope to see from someone running, a global company. And I think it's that reminder that we are all leaders in every moment. And as much as I wrote this book for an audience of traditional leaders, people who have position titles and they sit somewhere in the organisational chart and we recognise who they are, I equally wrote it for parents at home or single mothers trying to navigate, a small business from their kitchen bench while they're looking after children, or whoever it might be. And I think that's what I really hope people take away from this book, is that we are all leaders, and whether we realise it or not, we're impacting impacting other people every day.
That's a powerful statement out there. We are all leaders. And what does the Head and Heart Leader book talk about the attributes of a leader?
So I should firstly mention that as well as obviously the book, there's a free tool I've built, an online software tool with one of the universities here. I'd really encourage everyone to go to headheartleader.com. And maybe, Sri, you can put that in the show notes. I'm sure you already will. But go and take the survey, or it's called the Head and Heart Leader Scale. It takes about 5 minutes. And it will show listeners exactly what kind of a leader you are of these 8 attributes. And I'll talk about those attributes now. But I just thought it'd be interesting for people to quickly jump on and go and have a look before I talk. So there are an equal balance of attributes of the head and the heart, which is no surprise because really this is all about balance. And everything you've learnt to date, none of it's irrelevant. So everything you've learned about leadership, whether it's vulnerability or command and control or whatever, I'm not saying throw any of that out. The art, though, is knowing what's needed when. And I've tried to encapsulate that in these attributes. So the 4 attributes of leading with the head, the first is curiosity. And curiosity is not just about some things, but about anything. You really are curious about the world and about other people, and that's emotional curiosity as well. Wisdom, which that's no surprise. Obviously, being a wise leader has been around forever. But in terms of a modern leader, it's really about understanding how to make decisions, often in the face of little information. So how to weigh up risk and reward and try and piece together a few steps ahead when we're not sure where our changing world is heading. The third is called perspective, or in layman's terms, reading the room. And I mentioned that earlier. And of all 8 attributes, my research found that this is the superpower. This is a turbo boost to being a modern leader, and it's a head-based attribute. And this means you can read the room, and it might be a literal room, but more likely it's your organisation, your industry, your family, the wider world, and you can understand what's going to be effective in that environment and how to lead, how to adapt your leadership style. And you also notice who's missing from the room, and you're aware of, what kinds of voices do I need to have in that room to be able to make the best decision I can. And the fourth is capability. And capability is not just your mastery of whatever it is you do, and it can be a hobby or anything like that. It's also your ability to have a growth mindset around your own capability and what you do, and to try and build that in others. So that's all around growth and acknowledging that, that we've always got more to learn on whatever it is we're brilliant at. Then the 4 heart-based attributes. The first is humility. And of course, most people will just intuitively know what humility is about. But it's also about acknowledging that we don't, as leaders, have all the answers. So often the most common challenge I see for leaders is thinking they need to have all the answers. That to be a good leader, they can't look like they don't know what to do. And I think the smartest person in the room syndrome is a real challenge for modern leaders. And so humility is one way to overcome that. The second is around self-awareness, and that's understanding the impact that we're having on those around us. And self-awareness is notoriously difficult to judge ourselves, which is why feedback is so important. The third is courage, and this is courage to stand up for what you believe in, even in the face of pressure from others not to do so. And I think it's not just the big headline acts of courage you might hear about with whistleblowers, but it's standing up in a meeting and, doing public speaking if that's what makes you afraid, or it might be accepting a promotion you don't think you're ready for, or it could be challenging someone you think's being inappropriate at work. It's all those kinds of acts of everyday courage. And then the fourth and final attribute of the heart is empathy. And I think that's often the most misunderstood, because empathy isn't compassion or sympathy or pity. This is cognitive empathy, and it's being able to put yourself in the shoes of others, but without taking on those emotions. So together, they're the 8 attributes of a head and heart leader. And as I said, go to headheartleader.com. You can measure your own, whether you're more disposed to being a head or a heart leader, and it'll also rank those 8 for you in order of your strength. And so I think the whole idea is, as I said earlier, you need all of them, but knowing what is needed when is the art of a modern leader.
Absolutely. I think wonderful attribute in the world that we are in. You need a good mix, good balance of all of these attributes that you have articulated. So that's a wonderful list. I'll definitely urge my listeners to check on the show notes to take up this quick survey. Having said that, you have done enough research on all of this with your own career spanning over 3 decades now, Kirsten. Who are the leaders whom you admire and what makes them different from a head and heart standpoint?
Well, I have a buffet of leaders I admire. I've never had just a handful. And that's a hard question because no one is perfect. Anytime I think of a leader that I admire, I think, well, but I'm not sure they're doing as well in X. They might be strong in Y. And so in the book, I actually make a point of interviewing many dozens of different leaders. Some I write about are really well known, like Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft. He's a brilliant leader. He's very open in leading with empathy, and I believe he is someone who leads with his head and his heart. So is Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Volodymyr Zelensky, who's President of Ukraine. They are very well-known leaders, but as I said it earlier, the most common leader are people just like us. They're the people around us every day. So I also interview teachers and activists and entrepreneurs and police, people that are around us every day. And all of them are able to understand the impact that they're having on others, and they can integrate their head and their heart. And that for me is what makes leaders special, and they're the leaders we need too.
Is there some unique tip coming from the author of Head and Heart to say that these are the 2 or 3 things that you recommend the readers of the book or the listeners of the podcast to say, this is how you can develop or you can get better on those 8 attributes?
I think there are some easy ways that we can all, become better head and heart or better modern leaders. One is asking questions and not just coming up with the answer. So in my executive coaching work, that's probably the most common thing I'll work on with the leaders I work with, because they'll say, no one in my team ever speaks up. I'm always left to come up with the answers. What am I supposed to do to make them feel safe to speak up? And so that's a very real question. But generally, when it comes down to it, the leader is filling the space with their own answers. So, of course, people they're leading don't feel they need to speak up. So I think the skill of asking really good open-ended questions, even if you know the answer, is a really important tool for leaders. And I've come up with something called the word to wisdom ratio, which I've used now for more than a decade, because I noticed when I first joined boards, some of the most experienced board directors around the table barely said anything at all. And in fact, they'd let the whole conversation sort of go on, and then the few words they might say in a good question would completely change the whole direction of the conversation. And I, as a young director who spoke far more than I needed to, I'd think, I really want to get better at that. And I judged that they had a very high quality word to wisdom ratio, and mine needed a bit of work. So that's something that I still think about. And I think leaders can be thinking about, what was my word to wisdom ratio? How many words did I fill in that space to actually get an outcome? And you want that to be as low as possible so that others are getting the opportunity too.
That's fantastic. Those 2 attributes: ask more questions, ask better questions. And the more you speak is not necessarily the sign of intelligence.
Absolutely. Wisdom is asking really good questions and helping others come to the answer.
Here we are with Kirstin Ferguson, and we are on the Power of 3 round. Kirstin, the first of the Power of 3 is 3 leadership practices that anyone can practice.
Ask questions, notice your word to wisdom ratio, and learn to read the room.
That was easy. Great. We'll build on that start. 3 routines that is unique to Kirstin.
I walk on the beach every day. I read newspapers from around the world every day, and I use social media every day to connect with others.
Wonderful. Good going, Kirstin.
And just part of my routine is letting my dog Huey out of the office when he starts barking, as I've just done now. That's an added extra.
I hope he's safe outside.
Yes, he's fine.
Wonderful. 3 individuals you would like to have dinner with if there's no limitations. Who are those 3 individuals are?
Well, I'm going to cheat because I'm going to say my daughter Emily and my daughter Zoe, who are in a different state to me, and my husband Glenn.
3 advices to your older self?
Slow down, enjoy the moment, and feel proud of what you've achieved.
Great answers, Kirstin. Well, we cannot complete this conversation without get a book recommendation from this author, right? 3 book recommendations that Kirstin has.
Okay, I'm going to say Adam Grant's Think Again, fabulous book, and I was very fortunate to have Adam endorse Head and Heart. He's on the cover. Hubert Joly, who wrote The Heart of Business last year, also a must read. And then the book I'm reading right now is by Patrick Redden Keefe called Say Nothing, about the IRA troubles, and he's a fantastic investigative journalist. So totally different, but I'm loving it.
Great. Coming to you, the last of the Power of Three round question. 3 things on your bucket list, Kirstin.
Oh, to come and visit India and you, Sri. I'm going to put that on my list. Second is to enjoy the moment as my next book comes out. Often it's a big flurry of activity. I need to enjoy every moment. And the third is to figure out what the next book's going to be about. That's on my list.
So coming to you is a very unscripted question. As an author, how do you plan to go about conceiving what the next book should be like? How do you kind of go about the process? And how long does it take from conception to actually hit the books hitting the stands?
They're really good questions. So in terms of coming up with a concept, it's actually not, well, for me, it takes a while. You can't just fabricate, this is the concept. And so I think I slowly came up with the Head and Heart idea during COVID, started thinking about it a lot more. And then it was probably 18 months ago that I signed a contract with Penguin. Penguin are my publishers, and so they're already asking, what's the next book about? And I need to dwell on that over the summer holidays, because I've got some ideas, but to turn it into a full book, it needs to be more than just an idea. But that's part of the fun for me, and the research I absolutely love probably the most. So I'm looking forward to getting cracking on another one.
Kirstin, I had so much fun having this conversation with you. Like I said, this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. Before we sign off, what's your Inspire Someone Today message to all the listeners?
Oh, it's to remember you are a role model and you are a leader. And whether you realize it or not, other people are looking up to you and being inspired by you. So remember, leadership is just simply a series of moments. So make sure every moment leaves a positive legacy in your wake.
There is your recipe, my dear listeners, to leave a legacy by creating those positive moments. Couldn't have been better summary than this. Kirstin Ferguson, thank you so much for joining me today on this show, Inspire Someone Today.
Thank you, Sri. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what to listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.